Not to be a Debbie Downer here, that's not my goal. But when we're talking about making this transition into adulthood, we have to think about our place in time, our place in history. And I'm posing this discussion question to you is, do adolescents today have the necessary resources that they need to make this transition into adulthood? And no matter who you are, I would imagine that you're going to come up with the answer of yes and no, because it is a challenging question to answer. But just think about these points on here. And again, this isn't supposed to leave you with a sense of doubt or a sense of undue stress, um, because there are lots of other factors that could be buffers or could be really great resources for us as we transition into adulthood. But again, just looking at data, in a lot of sectors, jobs can be pretty scarce, so uncommon. And also jobs demand more formal education. For you guys, you are working towards your bachelor's degree, and that's a step in this direction of formal education. Not to say that there aren't awesome jobs that pay really well, that are more technical jobs that don't need these formal education opportunities. Those are out there too. But with more formal education, this also means that for many of us, student loans are pretty high, and that leaves us in a situation where we start life in debt, sometimes substantially so. Related to that, depending on where you live in the US or in the world, the cost of housing can be pretty high. So already we're at a disadvantage if we're going into the work community or workforce with student debt, and first jobs often don't pay all that much. For these reasons, the length of this period of adolescence is increasing. We're going to again talking about emerging adulthood. I think it'll be in for maybe 3 class periods away, 3 lectures away. But what's happening is that we are relying more on our parents financially. And it's not always the case that parents are upset about this or anything like that. Oftentimes they want us to stay around. But what's happening is that if we're not able to become financially independent, this is affecting our assumption of different roles. Again, this whole topic is about social transitions, new rights, roles, and responsibilities. So if we're staying with our parents longer, or not necessarily even physically staying with them, but relying on them to help us make sure our ends, our needs are met, then we're delaying assumption of other roles, maybe like family, or deciding to get engaged or get married. Not trying to say that that's everyone's decision. Again, that's a personal decision, but it is affecting some of these more traditional roles associated with adulthood. I want to also keep in mind, I want you to keep in mind that we have to be really aware. We've been talking about culture so far in this lecture, but we also have to be thinking about subcultures within the United States as well. And what I mean by that is we have quite a division of wealth in the US and other places around the world. And so if we have these situations where many of us are starting our adult lives with debt, what does this look like for individuals who perhaps can't afford to go to college, or that's just not possible, or who have even more debt because college is expensive, and obviously other costs of life as well. So we start to see that this transition into adulthood in contemporary US society, we really start to see more of a division between those individuals who have, and what I mean by have is just having money, having resources, and those who are have-nots. This is likely to grow. I'm going to continue that on the next slide. So when we think about factors that are key players in determining how well we go through this transition into adulthood, we see that poverty, when we're looking at all of these different factors at once, is at the top of the list. That means this is affecting the transition the most. Poverty is associated with a whole slew of potential problems. and which all lead to transitional difficulties, making the transition into adulthood successfully. So poverty is associated with failure in school. This There's so many different factors that are at play even in that simple equation, and it's not a simple equation. You could think about family support, moving from school to school, just not having textbooks or resources. Poverty is also associated with unemployment, out of wedlock pregnancy, and so on. And what's happening here is that when we know that we have individuals who have less than others, this is affecting their whole developmental process, or it can. It's not a guarantee. It's not necessarily the case that if one is impoverished, then automatically they are doomed to fail at life, but they do have a lot of forces against them. Um, I think about this a lot in my own life because of where I am today as somebody who has a PhD, but I grew up in a low income situation. How is it the case that I am where I am today? So I'm not trying to speak about, you know, poverty and talking about like as people as being different than I am. That is actually part of my in group when I was growing up. And so, yes, certainly it is the case that there are individuals who are able to do really great things with their life coming from an impoverished background, but these are barriers. There are barriers along the way that individuals who have more money and more resources don't necessarily have. So poverty is associated with many limits to economic and occupational success. Again, not to say that it's not possible to lead a really great life and to meet all of those adulthood milestones. It is just more challenging. That's all I have for social transitions, and the next lecture will be about, as I mentioned already, adolescent relationships. So we're going to be talking about peer relationships and also parent-child relationships, which will be an interesting thing to think about as we've already talked about those two topics in childhood. So I will talk to you soon.